Good evening. It's Thursday, October 8th. President Trump rejects new conditions from the Presidential Debate Commission for next Thursday's encounter with Joe Biden, a virtual debate to accommodate his COVID-19 illness.
No, I'm not going to waste my time on a virtual debate. That's not what debating's all about. You sit behind a computer and do a debate. It's ridiculous. And then they cut you off whenever they want.
It's not clear if there will be any more debates at all. Meanwhile, Trump calls Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris a monster and a communist following her debate last night with Mike Pence. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is questioning Trump's mental condition following his steroid treatment for the coronavirus. She's introducing legislation to set up a commission to investigate. The FBI arrests 6 men for plotting to kidnap Michigan's Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer.
Hatred, bigotry, and violence have no place in the great state of Michigan. If you break the law or conspire to commit heinous acts of violence against anyone, we will find you. We will hold you accountable, and we will bring you to justice.
The men are reportedly associated with an armed militia in Michigan. Separately, state authorities arrest 7 members of the Wolverine Watchmen for seeking to storm the state capitol and spark a civil war. Charges that San Francisco police conducted illegal surveillance of activists who participated in protests following the police killing of George Floyd, and day 2 of a 5-day strike by nurses and healthcare workers who charge unfair labor practices at Alameda County's Highland Hospital and other public health facilities in the county. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. The fate of final debates between President Donald Trump and Democrat Joe Biden was thrown into uncertainty today as the campaigns offered dueling proposals for moving forward with plans that have been upended by the president's coronavirus infection. It's unclear when or how the next debates would proceed, or whether voters would even get to see the 2 men running for the White House on the same stage again before Election Day. The whipsaw day began with an announcement from the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, which said the next debate, a town hall-style affair set for October 15th, next Thursday in Miami, would be held virtually. The commission cited health concerns following Trump's infection as the reason for the change. Trump, who's eager to return to the campaign trail despite the fact that he may still be infected by and infectious with COVID-19, said he wouldn't participate if the debate was not in person.
I heard that the commission a little while ago changed the debate style, and that's not acceptable to us. I beat him easily in the first debate, according to the polls that I've seen, but I beat him easily. I felt I beat him easily. I think he felt it too. No, I'm not going to waste my time on a virtual debate. That's not what debating's all about. You sit behind a computer and do a debate. It's ridiculous. And then they cut you off whenever they want.
Biden's campaign then suggested the event be delayed a week until October 22nd, which is when the third and final debate between the two had already been scheduled. Trump countered again, agreeing to a debate on October 22nd, but only if face-to-face, and asking that a third contest be added on October 29th, just before the election. Biden's advisors rejected squaring off that late in the campaign. The Debate Commission, which has the task of finding common ground between the competing campaigns, did not weigh in on any of the new proposals. The organization has come under scrutiny already after the first debate between Trump and Biden deteriorated, with Trump frequently interrupting his opponent and the moderator unable to take control. With the debate schedule unclear, Biden moved quickly to make sure he would still appear in front of a television audience next week. Instead of debating Trump next Thursday, he will take part in a town hall sponsored by ABC News. As he campaigned in Arizona today, Biden said he would also attend the October 22nd debate, currently scheduled for Nashville, Tennessee, regardless of Trump's plans. The president's campaign manager, Bill Stepien, said Trump would stage a rally rather than debate next Thursday, despite what ABC News says is an internal government document that shows 34 people have now been infected with COVID-19 at the White House virus hotspot. Trump is giving himself a clean bill of health, however.
I think I'm better when to a point where I'd love to do a rally tonight. I wanted to do one last night. But I think I'm better. No, I don't think I'm contagious.
That way if you're saying you're ready to go to a rally.
I don't think I'm contagious at all.
The Centers for Disease Prevention and Disease Control and Prevention's guidelines say an infected person is deemed contagious for at least 10 days after the onset of symptoms. That means the clock on Trump is still running. Earlier this week, Miami's Republican mayor said he didn't want Trump in his city if he was still testing positive for the virus. In a video that he tweeted out last night, Trump called his COVID-19 infection a blessing from God and falsely called the experimental antibody cocktail he was given a cure. And he promised to get that drug into hospitals and make it free for all. In a long phone call this morning on Fox, Trump called Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris unlikable, a monster, and a communist after watching last night's debate between Harris and Vice President Mike Pence. Pence and Harris faced off in a debate at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. It was much calmer and respectful than the presidential debate, but it still left plenty of room for the Democrat and the Republican to show off their differences. Whether it will change any minds in this polarized election season remains to be seen. Christopher Martinez has the story.
The first and only vice presidential debate marked a dramatic contrast with last week's chaotic presidential debate. This time, the candidates were more civil, more respectful of rules, making for an event so calm it would not disturb a fly. But later for that, the Salt Lake City debate gave the candidates a chance to repeat their favored talking points. On the Democratic side, California Senator Kamala Harris.
The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
She went straight for perhaps the weakest point of the Trump administration, its response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Frankly, this administration has forfeited their right to re-election based on this.
And on the Republican side, incumbent Vice President Mike Pence. He used a favored Republican argument that the Democrats are ideological extremists.
More taxes, more regulation, banning fracking, abolishing fossil fuel, crushing American energy, and economic surrender to China is a prescription for economic decline. President Trump and I will keep America growing.
Both candidates stuck to favored campaign arguments with little new to speak of. Of course, the debate was not without novelty, featuring as it did the first woman of color in a vice presidential debate, and the first time the candidates were separated by a plexiglass barrier to prevent infection by the coronavirus that has spread through the White House. Be that as it may, there were plenty of ideological differences buzzing about the room. For example, on health care, Pence talked about abortion, an issue that could come up for Supreme Court review.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris support taxpayer funding of abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. Late-term abortion. They want to increase funding to Planned Parenthood of America. Now, for our part, I would never presume how Judge Amy Coney Barrett would rule on the Supreme Court of the United States, but we'll continue to stand strong for the right to life.
Harris talked about preserving and expanding the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, adding a public option, and lowering the age limit for Medicare down to 60 years. The candidates also clashed over police reform. Pence dismissed the idea of systemic racism or implicit bias in policing, while Harris did not.
Look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana.
Perhaps the biggest news was not what the candidates said, but what they avoided talking about. Pence, like Trump, dodged a question about accepting the outcome of the election vote and a peaceable transfer of power, saying he expects the Trump-Pence ticket will win.
When you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing.
For Harris, the big question she avoided was about packing the Supreme Court. At the first presidential debate, Biden refused to say whether he would add judges to the Supreme Court if Republicans approved Trump's nominee. Harris followed suit, focusing her answer on a different issue. She described Trump's federal court appointees as ideological and incompetent.
And do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court? Let's have that discussion.
On the whole, the candidates probably did not change many minds, but they also probably pleased their supporters and their respective running mates. During the debate, President Trump tweeted, "Mike Pence is doing great. She is a gaffe machine." Democrat Joe Biden tweeted, "Oh, right, I was going to talk about that fly." So there was a big black fly that quite visibly landed on the vice president's head and stayed there for 2 minutes, sparking hilarity on Twitter. So that would explain Biden's tweet, which featured a picture of him holding a fly swatter. And so ends the vice presidential debate 2020. Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
And following last night's vice presidential debate, Vice President Pence and Vice Presidential nominee Senator Kamala Harris, along with Joe Biden, were back on the campaign trail. They both rallied crowds in the swing state of Arizona. KPFA's Jalen Herdman reports.
Both Vice President Mike Pence and former Vice President Joe Biden, along with running mate Senator Kamala Harris, are on the campaign trail in Arizona. While President Trump is recovering from the coronavirus in Washington, Pence said that Trump would be, quote, back on the campaign trail before you know it. Biden criticized Trump's lack of action on dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, saying that the president has acted irresponsibly in the face of the crisis.
Trump is spending more time. I've been calling on this, as you probably know, for the last 4 months. He should get out of his bunker and out of the sand trap on his golf courses. Not a joke. I mean, think about it. He never once, I've been around a while, he never one single time tried to bring Democrats and Republicans together in the White House to try to get a settlement. Not once. You can't name me a president in the lifetime of any of you that refused to deal that way in the middle of a crisis.
Seizing on the moment, Biden also mentioned Trump's, quote, deflection of responsibility after the president contracted the virus. Biden and his running mate pitched an economic message on the campaign trail, hammering President Trump for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic and arguing his failure to address the needs of working Americans. But Vice President Pence defended Trump and followed his playbook, minimizing the president's coronavirus infection. He also repeated many of the points made during Wednesday's debate, portraying Biden as ineffective in his nearly 50 years serving in the U.S. government and pushing back against the notion that there is systemic racism in police departments.
When you suggest that you will withdraw support from those who protect and serve, you embolden those who would harm our families. Now, Joe Biden justifies it by saying that America is, in his words, systemically racist. And he's actually said, and Kamala Harris repeated it last night, that police have an implicit bias against minorities in this country. When Joe Biden was asked if he'd support cutting funding for law enforcement, he replied, yes, absolutely. Well, let me make you a promise. Under President Donald Trump, we're not going to defund the police, not now, not ever. We're going to back the blue.
Across the country, protesters continue to gather in the name of more just living conditions, including defunding the police. In the vice presidential debate, Senator Kamala Harris said that she felt that justice was not served in the case of Breonna Taylor. Pence called it, quote, remarkable that Harris, as a former attorney general and prosecutor, would question the grand jury's decision in the case not to charge an officer with killing Taylor. Senator Harris stood by her statements on the campaign trail and highlighted the danger of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in light of President Trump's attempt to eliminate the Affordable Care Act.
All at the same time, we are experiencing the pandemic, the recession, a reckoning on racial justice, a changing climate that's battering our coastlines and setting the West on fire, and the future of healthcare hangs on top of it all. Because you see, President Trump is in the Supreme Court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And along with Senate Republicans, he's trying to jam through a Supreme Court justice who will do exactly that.
With less than 4 weeks remaining before the election, early voting began this week in Arizona, and both Biden and Harris placed a heavy emphasis on the importance of getting to the polls. I'm Jalen Herdman for KPFA News.
And you are listening to the evening news on KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. 6 people were charged in a plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Democrat Gretchen Whitmer today. 7 more were charged with plotting to target police and take over the Michigan State Capitol as part of the Boogaloo movement to start a civil war. Governor Whitmer today blamed President Trump for fomenting fear and violence in the country. KPFA's Christina Onnested reports.
Plans to start a civil war, kidnap a governor, take over the state capitol, and detonate bombs were thwarted, according to authorities who charged 13 men for conspiracy, terrorism, weapons violations, and other charges. First, the FBI announced charges against 6 men in a foiled attempt to kidnap Michigan Governor Democrat Gretchen Whitmer at her vacation home ahead of the November election, and then try her for treason. Here's U.S. Attorney Andrew Burge.
Under federal law, each of these individuals faces a term of any number of years up to life in prison if convicted. All of us standing here today want the public to know that federal and state law enforcement are committed to working together to make sure violent extremists never succeed with their plans, particularly when they target our duly elected leaders.
According to a criminal complaint unsealed in federal court, 4 of the 6 men had planned to meet Wednesday to make a payment on explosives and exchange tactical gear. 1 had purchased a taser for the kidnapping. They even went so far as to make explosives with shrapnel, test the explosives, and even eyed a bridge to detonate as a decoy. Again, Burge.
Members of this conspiracy on 2 occasions conducted coordinated surveillance on the governor's vacation home. Fox and Croft, in particular, according to the complaint, discussed detonating explosive devices to divert police from the area of the home. And Fox even inspected the underside of a Michigan highway bridge for places to seat an explosive. The complaint further alleges that Fox purchased a taser for use in the kidnapping and that the group successfully detonated an improvised explosive device wrapped with shrapnel to test its anti-personnel capabilities.
The FBI said 2 of the alleged conspirators agreed to unite others in their cause and take violent action against multiple state governments they believe violate the Constitution. One of the 6, Adam Fox, said he needed needed 200 men to storm the Capitol in Lansing, Michigan. Authorities say Fox and another co-conspirator had met with a militia group, the Wolverine Watchmen, to gain support for the cause. According to the FBI, the Wolverine Watchmen had already been on their watch list for making threats on social media against the government and police. They're followers of the white supremacist Boogaloo movement that wants to start a civil war. 7 men in that group were also charged in the attempted kidnapping plot and face up to 20 years in prison. Governor Whitmer pledged to find and bring other foes to justice.
Hatred, bigotry, and violence have no place in the great state of Michigan. If you break the law or conspire to commit heinous acts of violence against anyone, we will find you. We will hold you accountable, and we will bring you to justice.
Then she put the blame on President Donald Trump for emboldening and inspiring anti-government sentiment.
Stoking distrust, fomenting anger, and giving comfort to those who spread fear and hatred and division. Just last week, the President of the United States stood before the American people and refused to condemn white supremacists and hate groups like these 2 Michigan militia groups. Stand back and stand by, he told them. Hate groups heard the president's words not as a rebuke, but as a rallying cry, as a call to action. When our leaders speak, their words matter. They carry weight. When our leaders meet with, encourage, or fraternize with domestic terrorists, they legitimize their actions, and they are complicit.
President Trump criticized Whitmer in the early days of the pandemic for her shelter-at-home orders, and in one point tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." Armed protesters staged demonstrations inside and outside the Michigan Capitol later in the spring. Some followers of the Boogaloo movement. Several Boogaloo followers have been charged in other attempted crimes and attacks. In late May, 3 Boogaloo followers were arrested in Nevada for allegedly plotting to firebomb a park ranger station. But they scrapped that plan and targeted anti-racist protesters. And a Boogaloo follower shot and killed a guard at the Oakland Federal Courthouse during anti-racist protests in the wake of George Floyd's killing. They all served in the military. The crackdown comes as the Department of Homeland Security concluded white supremacists, quote, remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland, unquote. That conclusion was in a threat assessment released this week. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for KPFA.
Armed right-wing militias in Michigan go back at least 25 years. The Michigan militia was founded in 1994 by Air Force veteran Norman Olson to defend the rights of citizens against the federal government. Early meetings of the group were attended by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who bombed the federal courthouse in Oklahoma City in April of 1995, killing 168 people, including 60 children, the worst attack of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Olson was ousted from the Michigan militia's leadership later in 1995 and founded a new one called the Northern Michigan Regional Militia. In addition to the armed occupation of the state capitol earlier this year, the Michigan militia came to the armed defense of a barber in Oso, who defied state coronavirus safety rules to keep his barber shop open. And we have to take a pause here in the evening news on KPFA because these are the final hours of the KPFA fund drive for the fall. And we are tens of thousands of dollars short of our goal. The fund drive is going to end about this time tomorrow, and we are in danger of not reaching our goal. And just so you know, that goal is not an accountant's dream or best case plan. Those numbers are actual expenditures real expenditures already budgeted for this radio station. Another way of putting that is we need those $450,000 of that goal to keep operating this radio station through the end of the year. And we need your help to get there at 1-800-439-5732 or kpfa.org. And all of us have been enlisted to make one final big push to try to get us as close as possible to that goal. Therefore, the evening news has been told, improbably perhaps, to raise $3,000 by the end of the newscast. And we've already expended 25 minutes on the news, and believe me, we have more than an hour of material still to go. And how this is all going to fit together while we raise $3,000, I have no idea. But I do have an idea that I need to raise that $3,000, and I know for sure that I can only do it with your help, with your call at 1-800-439-5732, or you're going online to our website at kpfa.org and making a contribution. And for the first time in this fund drive, I have been given something to give to you. For a $200 contribution to KPFA, you can have the emergency solar crank radio. It's a Cato solar crank AM, FM, NOAA weather channel radio with a 5 LED flashlight. That would be handy to have at all times. Maybe an essential item to have, given the uncertainty that we live in this country, not only in this country, but especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, in California. You've got your fires, you've got your floods, you've got your earthquakes, you've got power outages coming at you for public safety reasons or simply because the grid can't handle the heat. So it's a good thing to have. 1-800-439-5732, because since it's battery and hand crank operated, you should be able to get emergency information at any time that you want. $300 or $200 contribution. If we could get 15 of you to do that, we'd make that $3,000 goal. Or if we could get 10 of you to enlist at $300 and get the 2-person emergency kit. Now that contains materials that you need to go on the lam, like food, water, and emergency blankets, food bar, water pouches, survival blankets, a first aid kit, emergency light sticks, disposable dust masks, emergency ponchos, a backpack. It's all in a backpack. That for a $300 contribution to this radio station. The 2-person emergency kit, $300. The emergency solar crank radio, $200. I don't have time to tell you why these items would be good for you to have. You can figure it out, but if not, I can't take the time to explain it. 1-800-439-5732 is the number to call, or online at kpfa.org. 1-800-439-5732, kpfa.org. I have to return to the news. We have to raise that $3,000 tonight. We have to get as close as we can to our overall goal 24 hours from now. We must have your help. 1-800-439-5732, kpfa.org. A federal appeals court today blocked a decision to extend the deadline for counting absentee ballots by 6 days in the battleground state of Wisconsin, in a win for Republicans who fought attempts to expand voting across the country. If the ruling stands, absentee ballots will have to be delivered to Wisconsin election clerks by 8 p.m. on Election Day if they are to be counted. The ruling makes it more likely that the results of the presidential race in the pivotal swing state will be known within hours of poll closings. Democrats almost certainly will appeal the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. Under state law, absentee ballots are due in local clerks' offices by 8 p.m. on election night, but Democrats and allied groups sued to extend the deadline after the April presidential primary in the state saw long lines, fewer polling places, a shortage of poll workers, and thousands of ballots mailed days after the election. Wisconsin, like much of the rest of the country, is already seeing massive absentee voting for November, and the state expects as many as 2 million people to vote absentee. House Speaker Democrat Nancy Pelosi today slammed President Trump for abandoning coronavirus relief negotiations. The president made his announcement on Twitter yesterday.
He walked away from what we were trying to do to put money in the pockets of the American people, food on the table, rent so they're not evicted. All of it coronavirus-centric. All of it coronavirus-centric. Not addressing any larger issue, coronavirus-centric. He walked away from our heroes. He said to those healthcare workers, police and fire, as I said before, teachers, transportation, sanitation, food workers, and the rest, we just don't care. You just don't matter. This is really appalling.
Pelosi said Democrats have had a plan, but Senate Republicans have stalled on it, not acted. She also noted 34 people have since contracted the coronavirus at the White House and questioned Trump's fitness to serve. She announced legislation that would create a commission to allow Congress to intervene under the 25th Amendment to the Constitution to remove a president from his executive duties. Pelosi said Trump needs to disclose more about his health condition after his COVID-19 diagnosis. Trump quickly answered back on Twitter, saying that, quote, crazy Nancy is the one who should be under observation. The British government is mulling fresh restrictions on everyday life in England, potentially in the big northern cities such as Liverpool, Manchester, and Newcastle, amid mounting fears that hospitals in coronavirus hotspots may soon be overwhelmed, with the number of people needing to go to the hospital with virus-related conditions rising, and in some areas in the north of England, alarmingly so. The pressure on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative government to do more is mounting. Simon Marks reports.
Local political leaders in the north of England are pushing back against government plans for fresh COVID-19 restrictions without what they call genuine dialogue and consultation. Tightened measures could be announced in a few hours' time, but Kate Stewart, who owns a hospitality business right next to Liverpool's famous Anfield Stadium, says the communication from the government has been dreadful.
The government's approach has been diabolical and embarrassing and an absolute disgrace. As an industry, we're still being targeted. Things are changing each week and we're given barely any time to prepare, destroying communities and the heart of our city centre.
Simon Marks, Washington.
More coronavirus cases in France and more people sick with symptoms. The government has placed 4 more major cities on maximum coronavirus alert starting this weekend and issued warnings to several others. Russ Cullen reports from Paris.
The cities of Grenoble, Saint-Étienne, Lille and Lyon have now joined Marseille and Paris in the maximum COVID-19 alert zone. The 4 cities will now likely face the same restrictions that apply to Paris and Marseille, including the closure of bars, restaurants only being allowed to open if they apply tougher customer protocols, and only allowing university lecture halls to operate at 50% capacity. Ross Cullen, Paris.
You're listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast airing each night at 6, half-hour edition on the weekends, always archived online, kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle, and we are in the final 24 hours of the fund drive here at KPFA, and we are tens of thousands of dollars short of our goal. We're going to end at this hour tomorrow. We need your help. We need to raise $3,000 towards that goal tonight on the evening news. This is the next to the last time that I will be making this appeal. 1-800-439-5732, kpfa.org. We do have a couple of enticements tonight for a $200 donation. You can get the emergency solar hand-cranked radio for a $200 contribution, or for a $300 contribution, the two-person emergency kit. 1-800-439-5732, kpfa.org. A coronavirus outbreak at a skilled nursing home in Watsonville has killed 9 people and infected more than 60 residents and staff. Health officials in Santa Cruz County said the outbreak at Watsonville Post-Acute Center was first detected about 3 weeks ago. State figures show that about 4,692 nursing facility residents and staff members have died. That represents nearly a third of all California COVID-19 deaths since the start of the pandemic. A member of California Governor Gavin Newsom's office staff has tested positive for COVID-19, and contact tracing has begun. The governor's office says that the staff member had not interacted with Newsom or with staff who routinely interact with the governor. Separately, a state employee who works in a space shared with some staff from the governor's office also tested positive for COVID-19, but the person also had not interacted with the governor or his close staff. With COVID-19 ravaging Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers says a field hospital will open on the state fairgrounds next week to prevent care facilities from becoming overwhelmed. Mike Moen reports.
The situation comes as rural healthcare systems in the U.S. struggle to survive. Among Midwestern states, Wisconsin isn't alone in seeing the virus infect more people, but it still is near the top nationally in weekly cases per capita. Brock Slabaugh of the National Rural Health Association says a big concern right now is rural areas where community spread has been hard to control. Making matters worse, it's been difficult for residents in these areas to access care.
When someone is experiencing anxiety due to physical conditions that are very troubling, these delays can be very, very impactful and create lots of problems in their well-being.
He says rural providers are seeing fractures being widened in these communities. He cites staffing, supplies, and lack of reimbursements as critical problems for hospitals. In rural Wisconsin, recruitment and retention of healthcare workers is seen as a worsening problem, and a 2018 study projects a shortage of primary care doctors in the state by 2035. Nationally, 15 rural hospitals have closed in the U.S. this year. None have been in Wisconsin, but Slabaugh says many systems in smaller communities face a severe cash crunch, leaving room for doubt about their future. He points to a pause in elective surgeries at the start of the pandemic and slow reimbursement payments, while adding it will be hard for them to improve their outlook in the near future.
This will exacerbate, I think, some of the problems that have already existed for a long time in rural communities.
He says part of the problem is that treating COVID patients can be very expensive, placing an even greater financial burden on facilities struggling to stay afloat. To get a handle on the immediate problem, he says increased testing and contact tracing in rural areas can help with case management and potentially reduce demand for hospitalizations. Mike Moen, Public News Service.
Racial justice activists in San Francisco are suing the city and the police department for spying on organizers of protests in the wake of the George Floyd killing. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, and the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California filed the suit on behalf of Nathan Sheard, Nestor Reyes, and Hope Williams.
The San Francisco Police Department illegally spied on activists during the George Floyd protests. It was a tactic to provoke fear and keep people from speaking out. We have the right to organize, speak out, and march without fear of police surveillance.
The suit alleges the surveillance was illegal, but since San Francisco banned the use of facial recognition technology last year. Sarai Hussein is an attorney with the EFF. Matt Cagle is an attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union.
From the end of May through early June, the SFPD tapped into a private network of 400 surveillance cameras to spy on Black-led protests against police violence.
This surveillance invaded protesters' privacy and chilled them from organizing or participating in future protests. The surveillance is also in direct defiance of a city ordinance that requires the police to seek approval from the public and the city's board of supervisors before acquiring, borrowing, or using surveillance technology.
The suit says police violated a city ban on using surveillance technology without prior approval, except in emergencies. Police Chief Bill Scott said the department sought to employ the cameras because of violence surrounding the protests, but ultimately didn't use them. The former Minneapolis police officer charged with murder in the case of George Floyd was released from jail after posting $1 million bond. Several hundred people marched last night to protest Derek Chauvin's release. They blocked an intersection for a time with chants including "No justice, no peace, prosecute the police." Chauvin and 3 other former officers are scheduled to stand trial next March. Jacob Blake has been discharged from a hospital in Wisconsin and is now undergoing treatment as an inpatient at an Illinois rehabilitation clinic. Blake was left paralyzed after a Kenosha police officer shot the 29-year-old African-American man in the back several times in August. His uncle says Blake was discharged about a week ago. He declined to say where Blake was being treated, citing threats to the Blake family since the shooting. Advocates for people incarcerated at Alameda County's Santa Rita Jail are demanding Alameda County's Department of Public Health take over medical care at the facility. A letter sent to supervisors and jail staff claims 8 major issues at the jail, including inadequate sanitation and the violation of prisoners' constitutional and statutory rights. Daniel Whitty reports.
Lawyers and advocates for the incarcerated at Alameda County's Santa Rita Jail say jail staff are not taking proper procedures to protect prisoners from the spread of COVID-19. Prisoners say they're faced with unsanitary conditions and a lack of medical care, like the relative of Adalia Vasquez. She declined to give his name, but describes the horrors and hardships he went through while in Santa Rita Jail.
And he would call me and he would say, "They're not helping me. They're not giving me any medication." And one night he was talking to a deputy, and I was listening to everything he was saying to my relative. He was saying, that not to complain because, you know what happens when the lights go off, and like, it was like a threatening to him. And he would say, "Well, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And he couldn't breathe. And they were not getting any help for him. And, he was complaining about not getting food, or if he get any food, it was open and it seemed like the rat or the mice was biting that food.
Vasquez says he was detained with a COVID-19 positive cellmate, and although he has kidney disease, he was denied necessary prescriptions. That's why a coalition of advocacy groups, including the National Lawyers Guild and the Santa Rita Jail Hotline, are calling for broader testing of inmates at Santa Rita. The Santa Rita Jail Hotline is a number inmates can call to lodge complaints and ask for legal support. According to activists with the hotline, complaints they've received include inmates being denied coronavirus tests, complaints that jail guards and staff are not wearing masks or social distancing, and the denial of medical treatment. Darby Aono is a member of the Santa Rita Jail Hotline and a legal worker who has been tracking the jail's publicly available COVID-19 data since March. She says the jail, overseen by Sheriff Greg Ahern, is under-testing inmates to keep infection rates low.
you're not going to find positives if you don't test. And so I think it's really, really important. And we have the numbers to prove that they are not testing. There is testimony from people who have been incarcerated in Santa Rita jail showing that they are not testing people. And if they are testing people, they're oftentimes waiting 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, to make sure that the virus is out of people's bodies before they actually test them so that they will come back negative.
She says after a major outbreak in July that led to 110 positive coronavirus infections, roughly 6% of the jail's population was tested for coronavirus. Advocates are calling for the early release of inmates and that those serving time receive more credit for time served to support early releases. John Lindsay Poland with Decarcerate Alameda County and the American Friends Service Committee says rather than spend so much money on prisoners, the county should spend it on community-based services like mental health support and housing.
About 40% of the people at Santa Rita have a serious mental illness, and the jail is no place to improve mental illness. There's no treatment for mental illness, just as there's no treatment for COVID inside the jail. Alameda County pays about $134,000 a year per prisoner to keep people in Santa Rita.
Poland goes on to explain that sheriff's deputies aren't trained to deal with mental and physical illnesses, nor do they care. Alameda County has gotten a task force in place to help people in Santa Rita, and one of the task force's goals is to eliminate people with mental illnesses from the jail system. As of now, there is no data on how many incarcerated people have mental illnesses. Advocates are also calling on the county to end its contract with the for-profit healthcare service provider, WellPath. Instead, they're calling on the County Department of Public Health to take control of medical care at Santa Rita. For KPFA News, I'm Daniel Whitty.
And this is the evening news on KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey, this is Brian Edwards Teekert. If you vote in California, you just got a ballot, and we want to help. We are sprinting through debates on propositions, interviews with candidates, and special reports on how voting is different during a pandemic, also on where the money's going in local politics. Our first two ballot breakdowns will happen on Tuesday, October 13th and Wednesday, the 14th at 7 p.m., right after the news. When Supreme Court hearings end, we'll pick up during the 8 a.m. hour of Upfront, and all our election segments will live online at kpfa.org. Just look for Ballot Breakdown.
And that starts next week. Meanwhile, this week, we've still got some business to do, and we are running out of time to complete that business. The business is to raise the amount of money we need to keep this radio station on the air in the coming months. And the problem is we're coming up short. We're coming up short of our goal, and we're coming up short of time. We're running out of time. We're in the final 24 hours of the fund drive. Here on the evening news, we're in the final 11 minutes of the newscast with an overwhelming goal of $3,000 to reach by the time we sign off. $3,000 critically needed to get us closer to that goal. We need to get as close as possible. And we need your help at 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org. We're offering you for $200 to KPFA, the emergency solar crank radio, or for a $300 contribution to KPFA, the two-person emergency kit, a backpack with survival blankets, emergency food, emergency light sticks. emergency ponchos. You can go online at kpfa.org and make your pledge and also see more about what I'm talking about. Or you can call 1-800-439-5732. kpfa.org, 1-800-439-5732. Please help us. This is the next to the last time that the news will be asking for your support in this fund drive. If you appreciate the news and information that you get at 6 o'clock and throughout the day here on KPFA, please help us to continue to do our job. 1-800-439-5732, online at kpfa.org. Nurses and healthcare workers are staging a 5-day unfair labor practices strike at Alameda County's Highland Hospital and other public health facilities in the county, including Alameda and San Leandro hospitals. The union's charge that the Alameda health system has laid off workers punitively, citing cutting critical staff in the middle of a pandemic. Chris Lee reports.
Shaquila Carter is an organizer with SEIU 1021 and a community health outreach worker. She supports victims of sexual assault in Highland Hospital's emergency room. Carter says her position is being eliminated as of October 16th. She worries about what will happen to the predominantly young women of color she's worked with over the past 3 years.
I think that just being able to hold that for them and to be able to direct them and assist them and take away at least some of the worry that they have, even after they walk out the door. You know, I turn into a mother because a lot of the girls are young, they're Black, a lot of the girls are brown, they're immigrants.
70% of AHS patients are Black or brown. Highland Hospital is also Alameda County's only level 1 trauma center.
If I can't reach them or touch them in the way that I set out to do, then I'll try to figure out how to do it some other way.
Carter will be transferred to another job, but a total of 82 full-time equivalent positions are being eliminated. Both the coronavirus pandemic and the economic downturn that followed are beating down the public sector, but a recent grand jury report explains that the Alameda health system was already losing revenue before the pandemic. It's projected to lose over $50 million this year. Staffing comprises over 3/4 of the budget. Carter says a dozen translators and several health information staff were laid off. They're the people who answer the phones, provide information to patients, and book appointments. Registered nurse Laura Witten works in Highland's emergency room. She and others say understaffing has harmed the hospital for years. Without sufficient staff, patients in the ER can't be seen.
Typically on a day like that, we have people in the waiting room that will be waiting 8, 9, 12 hours sometimes. We're so busy and short-staffed and without the equipment we need or the resources we need, where you just physically cannot do what needs to be done. And so those are the days that are most difficult. Those are the most difficult patients to think about. Either you weren't able to do anything at all, or what you were able to do was just such a shortcoming that it wears on your soul. We're all here in the healthcare profession to help people. It's just an instinct.
Witten says Highland is continuing to require its workers to sign a form every time they need PPE and essentials like masks, gowns, and disinfectant wipes. KPFA News reported on this policy back in March, when a global supply chain shortage left many hospitals rationing what little supplies they had left. The health system said in a written response to the strike that it's forced to make difficult decisions because of the coronavirus pandemic and the $100 million in debt accrued decades ago. Some workers say that the debt and looming insolvency is evidence of management incompetence. The strikers demand that Alameda County dissolve the AHS Board of Trustees and install new governance that is accountable to the public. Alameda County District 3 Supervisor Wilma Chan agrees that the system hasn't been working for a long time.
AHS and the administration in particular has really alienated the unions in terms of their level of trust by their attitude at the table and by the number of items that they feel they were trying to negotiate at one time. Apparently there's like 128 pages of takeaways in for one of the unions over there. I feel they've been bargaining in an inappropriate way. We definitely want more transparency on their finances and what's going on. We definitely want more accountability from their top leadership. And we definitely want better labor relations.
State legislation established the Alameda Health System's Board of Trustees, and it will take new state legislation to make a change. Chan says she and Supervisor Richard Valle hope to make a determination on the future of AHS as soon as the end of this year. In Oakland, I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA.
Governor Gavin Newsom has called for protecting nearly a third of California's land and coastal waters as his latest effort to combat climate change. Newsom has signed an executive order directing state agencies to pursue ways to store climate-warming carbon in natural resources to remove it from the atmosphere. The goal is to conserve 30% of the state's massive lands and coastal waters in the next decade, and it's part of a larger global effort.
We'll be the first state in the United States of America to do both land conservation and coastal conservation. And we will join other parts of the globe, some 38 nations and some national governments that have done the same. This is an international movement. California, as the fifth largest economy in the world, needs to flex its muscles, needs to assert itself and to advance that cause.
The announcement comes about 2 weeks after Newsom directed state regulators to come up with rules to ban sales of new gas-powered passenger cars and trucks by 2035. The group Food and Water Watch responded with criticism of the governor's fossil fuel policy. The group charged that more than 2,600 fossil fuel drilling permits issued by his administration this year are contributing to climate chaos, not addressing it. All the evacuation orders for the glass fire in Sonoma County, including in the city of Santa Rosa, are now canceled. CAL FIRE says the blaze is now 66% contained. It expects full containment by October 20th. The latest tally for destroyed homes, 332 in Sonoma County, 307 in Napa County. Altogether, the blaze destroyed more than 1,500 structures of all kinds. 1-800-439-5732. The last call here, and that is the number to call here in the penultimate day of the fund drive here at KPFA. And we are still tens of thousands of dollars short of our goal, and we are short tonight of our goal of raising $3,000 in this newscast. So if you can help us out here in the last call, the number to call is 1-800-439-5732, or you can go online at kpfa.org and call us that way. 1-800-439-5732, kpfa.org. $300 for the backpack filled with emergency supplies, or $200 for the solar hand crank emergency radio, or nothing except the news. 1-800-439-5732. The Spare the Air alert for the San Francisco Bay Area extended again through Saturday. Tomorrow in the Bay Area, morning clouds, afternoon sun, highs in the mid-60s. Further inland, partly cloudy with highs in the low 80s. Cooler in the Central Valley tomorrow with a high near 80.
Tune in Thursday nights, starting at 7 p.m. for Apex Express, a weekly magazine-style radio show featuring the voices and stories of Asians and Asian Americans from all corners of their communities. Then at 8, it's a unique mix of singer-songwriter, folk, rock, soul, country, and R&B on The Bonnie Simmons Show. Finally, at 10 p.m., The Here and Now with Dirk Richardson, bringing you a mix of singer-songwriters to avant-garde jazz, old faves, new voices, and live performances. That's Thursday nights on 94.1 KPFA and kpfa.org.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, 97.5 K248BR in Santa Cruz, and online worldwide at kpfa.org.
The following program